At 9:21 that morning, a terrified mother walked into a bank and silently begged for help. The bank manager understood immediately. She was being held hostage. Her husband and 2 daughters were trapped inside their home. Within seconds, he called 911. Police were alerted. Officers were dispatched, and for a brief moment, it seemed like the family might survive. But they didn't. Before anyone could reach that house, 3 innocent people would be dead. The home would be set on fire, and one man would be forced to watch his entire world disappear in a single morning. The most disturbing part, the 2 men responsible should never have been free in the first place. This is the story of the Cheshire Home Invasion, one of the most horrifying crimes in American history. Less than 24 hours earlier, everything seemed normal. The Petit family was spending a quiet Sunday together in Cheshire, Connecticut. It was the kind of neighborhood where people felt safe. Tree-lined streets, well-kept homes, children riding bicycles during the summer. The kind of place where violent crime felt like something that happened somewhere else. Not here, not to families like the Petits. Dr. William Petit was a respected physician. His wife, Jennifer, was known throughout the community for her kindness and dedication. Together, they had built a life that many people dreamed of. A successful career, a beautiful home, and 2 daughters with bright futures ahead of them. 17-year-old Haley was preparing to leave for college. She excelled in academics, athletics, and community service. Teachers described her as driven, compassionate, and determined to make a difference in the world. Her younger sister, 11-year-old Michaela, had a completely different personality. She was creative, energetic, always finding new hobbies and interests. She loved cooking and often surprised her family with meals she had learned to make on her own. On July 22, 2007, Michaela was excited. She had planned a special dinner for that evening. Earlier that day, she and her mother had gone shopping for ingredients. It seemed like a simple trip, one that would be forgotten by the next morning. But while Jennifer and Michaela walked through the supermarket aisles, someone was watching them. Someone who had already spent much of his life in trouble with the law. Someone who should have been under close supervision. Someone who saw the Petit family and immediately began imagining what he could take from them. His name was Joshua Komisarjevsky, and by the time the sun went down, he had already chosen his targets. The Petit family had no idea that a decision made inside a grocery store was about to destroy everything. Joshua Komisarjevsky was 26 years old. By 2007, he had already spent years moving through the criminal justice system. Burglary, drug abuse, probation violations, arrests. His record was filled with warning signs. Yet somehow, he was free. Even more concerning, he wasn't acting alone. Joshua had become friends with a man named Stephen Hayes. At 44 years old, Hayes had spent much of his adult life behind bars. His criminal history stretched back decades. Violence, burglary, repeated encounters with law enforcement. The 2 men met through a rehabilitation program. Both were supposed to be rebuilding their lives. Instead, they found something else. Each other, and together, they became far more dangerous. On the evening of July 22nd, after spotting Jennifer and Michaela at the supermarket, Joshua contacted Hayes. What happened next would later become one of the most chilling parts of the entire investigation. The 2 men began exchanging text messages. Not messages about getting jobs, not messages about recovery, not messages about starting over. They were discussing a crime, and according to investigators, they weren't acting impulsively. They were planning, preparing, looking forward to it. As the Petit family relaxed inside their home, the 2 men continued communicating. Every message pushed them one step closer to violence, one step closer to a decision they could never take back. Hours passed. Darkness settled over Cheshire. Inside the Petit home, the family finished dinner. They talked. They laughed. They prepared for another week of work and school. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing seemed wrong. But several miles away, 2 predators were making their final preparations. And sometime after midnight, They began moving toward Sorghum Mill Drive, toward the Petit family home, toward a nightmare that would last for nearly 7 hours. The family was asleep when it began. The attackers were wide awake. Sometime during the early hours of July 23, 2007, the silence inside the Petit home was shattered. The intruders had arrived. For the family, the night changed in an instant. One moment, they were asleep in their beds. The next, strangers had entered their home. The attackers quickly took control of the situation. Family members were separated. Fear spread through the house, and almost immediately, it became clear that this was far more than a simple burglary. At first, the intruders focused on money. They demanded financial information, credit cards, bank accounts, anything of value. The family cooperated, like most people would, because they believed the same thing many victims believe in situations like this. If they stayed calm, if they did what they were told, maybe everyone would survive. But as the hours passed, that hope slowly began to disappear. Outside, the sun began to rise over Cheshire. Neighbors woke up. Cars drove through nearby streets. People started their normal Monday morning routines. Meanwhile, inside the Petit home, a nightmare continued behind closed doors. Hour after hour, the family remained trapped, waiting, hoping, praying that somehow this ordeal would end. But the attackers weren't leaving. Instead, they appeared to be making new plans that would push the situation into even darker territory. Then came a decision that would change everything. The intruders wanted money, not just valuables from the house, cash, and they believed Jennifer Petit could get it. Around mid-morning, they forced her to leave the residence and go to a local bank. For the first time in hours, one of the victims was outside the house, away from the attackers, away from the nightmare. And for Jennifer, it may have felt like the only chance she would ever get, the only opportunity to save her family. What happened inside that bank would later become one of the most heartbreaking moments in the entire case. Because Jennifer managed to do something extraordinary, she found a way to ask for help without saying a word. And for a brief moment, it looked like it might actually work. Police were about to get involved. A rescue seemed possible. But inside the Petit home, the clock was already ticking, and nobody knew just how little time remained. When Jennifer Petit entered the bank that morning, she was carrying far more than a withdrawal slip. She was carrying the lives of her family. Somehow, despite being under constant pressure, she managed to alert employees that something was terribly wrong. The bank manager immediately understood the seriousness of the situation. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a domestic dispute. A woman was in danger, and so was her family. At 9:21 a.m., a call was placed to 911. From that moment forward, everything became a race against time. Dispatchers gathered information. Officers were notified. Vehicle descriptions were provided. Updates were shared in real time. For the first time that morning, the people responsible for the crime had a problem. Law enforcement was now aware that something was happening. But there was one thing police still didn't know. They didn't know what was happening inside the house. They didn't know how dangerous the situation had become. And they didn't know how desperate the attackers were becoming. Back at the residence, tension continued to build. Every minute that passed increased the risk. Every decision became more dangerous than the last. Meanwhile, officers were moving toward what they believed was a hostage situation. A difficult situation, a serious situation, but one that could still end with everyone alive. Unfortunately, reality was far worse than anyone imagined. The attackers had reached a crossroads. They could surrender, they could run, or they could attempt to destroy every witness who could identify them. The choice they made would shock the entire country. As police closed in, events inside the house spiraled toward a tragic conclusion. The opportunity to save the family was slipping away, and nobody outside the home realized it. Then, suddenly, smoke began rising into the sky above Cheshire. What happened next would transform a hostage situation into one of the most infamous murder cases in American history. By the time police were moving toward the Petit residence, the situation inside the home had reached its breaking point. The attackers knew the window was closing. Sooner or later, someone would arrive. Sooner or later, they would be caught. And instead of giving up, they made a decision that would define this case forever. A decision so cruel that even veteran investigators struggled to comprehend it. As the morning progressed, smoke suddenly began rising from the property. What had started as a hostage situation was now becoming something far worse. Neighbors noticed something was wrong. Emergency responders rushed toward the scene, but events were unfolding faster than anyone could react. Inside the home, conditions rapidly deteriorated. The family had endured hours of fear and uncertainty. Now they were facing something even more terrifying. For William Petit, the situation seemed hopeless. He had been injured, restrained, separated from his family, and yet somehow he refused to give up. As smoke began filling parts of the house, survival instincts took over. With extraordinary determination, he managed to free himself. In pain and barely able to stand, he searched for a way out. Every second mattered. Every breath mattered. Somehow, against all odds, William escaped through a basement window. He stumbled toward a neighbor's home, injured, disoriented, barely conscious, but alive. Meanwhile, police were arriving at the property. The scene before them was chaos, smoke, fire, panic. And then they saw movement. Two men were attempting to leave the property, the very men responsible for everything. Officers moved quickly. The suspects tried to flee. Within moments, a confrontation unfolded in the driveway, but there would be no escape. The vehicle was stopped. The suspects were taken into custody. The nightmare was over, at least for them. For everyone else, it was only beginning. As firefighters battled the blaze, a devastating reality slowly emerged. The family that officers had hoped to rescue was still inside. And when investigators finally pieced together what had happened that morning, the entire nation was horrified. 3 innocent lives had been lost: a wife, a daughter preparing for college, and a child with her entire future ahead of her. The crime immediately became national news. People wanted answers. How had this happened? Why were these men free? And could this tragedy have been prevented? The investigation that followed would uncover evidence so overwhelming that there would be little doubt about who was responsible. But even after the arrests, another battle was only beginning: the battle for justice. Years passed before the case finally reached trial. But despite the time that had gone by, the wounds left by that July morning had never healed. The crime remained one of the most discussed cases in Connecticut. For many people, it had become more than a murder case. It had become a symbol of everything that could go wrong when dangerous offenders slipped through the cracks of the system. When the trial began, prosecutors faced a simple challenge: not proving who committed the crime. That question had largely been answered by the evidence. Instead, they needed to show the full scope of what had happened. The jury listened as investigators reconstructed the timeline, hour by hour, decision by decision. The picture that emerged was devastating. Witnesses testified. Experts took the stand. Evidence collected during the investigation was presented in court. And as the days passed, jurors were exposed to details that many would never forget. For the defense, the situation was difficult. The evidence was overwhelming. Rather than focus entirely on innocence, attention shifted toward punishment. The defense attempted to explain the backgrounds of the accused, their childhoods, their struggles, the circumstances that had shaped their lives. But for many observers, those explanations changed nothing, because regardless of how the defendants arrived at that moment, 3 innocent people were gone, and 1 man had been forced to live with unimaginable loss. Throughout the proceedings, William Petit remained at the center of the story, not because he sought attention, but because he represented everything that had been taken away: his family, his future, the life he had built. Many people wondered how anyone could survive such a tragedy, yet somehow, he continued moving forward. one day at a time, one step at a time. Eventually, the verdicts arrived. Guilty. The juries found both defendants responsible. For many people, the outcome brought relief. But another question immediately followed. What punishment would be enough for a crime like this? At the time, Connecticut still allowed the death penalty, and prosecutors believed this case met every standard for its use. The crimes had shocked the nation. The suffering inflicted on the victims was undeniable, and public outrage was immense. When sentencing was announced, both men received the ultimate punishment, death. For many families, that might have been the end of the story, but in this case, it wasn't, because years later, a controversial decision would reopen one of the most emotional debates in modern American criminal justice. And once again, the Petit case would find itself at the center of national attention. For a time, it appeared that the legal battle was over. The defendants had been convicted, the sentences had been handed down, and many people believed the chapter had finally closed. Then everything changed. In 2012, Connecticut voted to abolish the death penalty for future cases. At first, the decision seemed unlikely to affect the Cheshire case. The crimes had occurred years earlier. The sentences had already been imposed. But the debate was far from over. Several years later, court decisions ultimately resulted in all remaining death sentences in Connecticut being converted to life imprisonment without the possibility of release. That included the men responsible for the Cheshire Home Invasion. For some people, the change represented progress. They argued that the state should not execute prisoners under any circumstances. Others saw it very differently. They believed that if any crime deserved the death penalty, it was this one. The debate became emotional, personal, and deeply divisive. Even today, people continue to disagree. Was justice served? Or was something taken away from the victims once again? The answer depends on who you ask. But regardless of where people stand on the death penalty, there is one fact nobody disputes. And nothing could bring Jennifer, Haley, and Michaela back. Nothing could erase what happened on July 23, 2007. And nothing could restore the life that William Petit lost. Yet somehow, he refused to let tragedy become the final chapter of his story. In the years that followed, he dedicated himself to honoring the memory of his family. He spoke publicly about victims' rights. He advocated for changes within the criminal justice system. And he worked to ensure that the names of Jennifer, Haley, and Michaela would never be forgotten. Because while criminals often become infamous, the people they harmed deserve to be remembered even more. Jennifer wasn't simply a victim. She was a mother, a wife, a caregiver, someone who spent her life helping others. Haley wasn't just a name in a headline. She was a young woman preparing for the future, a future that was filled with possibility. Michaela was a child with dreams that would never have the chance to become reality. When people discuss this case, they often focus on the horror, the violence, the failures, the controversy. But perhaps the most important lesson is something much simpler. Behind every true crime story are real people, real families, real futures, and real lives that can never be replaced. Nearly 2 decades later, the Cheshire Home Invasion remains one of the most disturbing crimes in American history, not only because of what happened, but because of how close help came. A mother found a way to ask for help. A bank manager made the right call. Police were alerted. The system began moving. And yet somehow, it still wasn't enough. That is the question that continues to haunt this case. How did everything go so wrong? And could it have been prevented? Those questions may never be answered completely, but the memory of the Petit family remains. And perhaps that is why this story continues to resonate all these years later. Not because of the criminals, but because of the lives that were lost, and the family that should have had many more years together. Thank you for watching. If you found this case informative, consider subscribing for more true crime documentaries. And as always, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe justice was served in this case? Or do you think the outcome should have been different?